Ryan Hampton is a national addiction recovery advocate at Facing Addiction and founder of the Voices Project. He's also a former White House staffer and the author of American Fix: Inside the Opioid Addiction Crisis and How to End It. We talked about the book, Ryan's personal story of addiction and recovery, and how that shaped his views on the current crisis facing the country. Ryan Hampton, thank you so much for coming on. I appreciate it.
Great to be here, Andrew.
The book is American Fix: Inside the Opioid Addiction Crisis and How to End It. But I'd like to begin with your personal story, which is kind of amazing. You went from being on the White House staff to being on heroin, which is quite a journey. Can you tell us what happened?
Sure. I mean, my story isn't really unique. It's unique in the sense that I worked in the White House, but the circumstances of how I got addicted to heroin, I had an up and coming career in politics. I was a good student. From Miami, Florida. I had worked on multiple presidential campaigns. I worked in the Clinton administration. I was actually in Washington, D.C. In 2003, right after the midterms, working for the Democratic National Committee. And I went on a hiking trip to the Billy Goat Trail. If you don't know anything about it, really steep trail in between Virginia and Maryland. And I slipped, injured my ankle, injured my knee, went to go see an urgent care doctor at the time. And I was prescribed a very high grade opioid, Dilaudid. Now, I was supposed to get an MRI for that ankle, never did. And I treated it pretty much with opioid pain medication for several months before moving to Florida. Where things really spiraled out of control for me was when I moved back to Florida. If you know anything about Florida in the mid 2000s, it was the height of what was the pill mill epidemic, which I got caught up into. And that eventually led to a heroin addiction as a result of being cut off of medications kind of at the 11th hour several years later. I didn't really have much of an option. I was heavily dependent on them, physically, emotionally, everything about me. And it was a quick fall from, working in the White House and traveling aboard Air Force One to being on the streets, homeless, addicted to heroin.
Wow. Did you know when you started taking the drug that it was addictive? I mean, when you didn't get the MRI, were you complicit in the addiction, or did you just stumble into it?
I mean, that's a very valid question. I think about it today. How could I not have known? But I really didn't. This was a different time. It was early 2000s. I was legitimately prescribed the medication. I thought that it was okay. I knew something was different about it because of the way it made me felt. However, with all that being said, I was told by doctors that I could, easily wean off of it, that it was safe, that the addictive risk was minimal, that I didn't really need to worry about that. It was, given to me in the comfort of a doctor's office by someone whom we're taught to trust. And the fact that it had my name on it, and it was a pill bottle, it legitimized it. I did not make the connection between what I was taking and the possible, abuse factor that would come in later. I really didn't.
Wow. Now, before we talk about the rest of the country, how did you get clean?
So I found recovery, interestingly enough. I had been through multiple bouts of treatment. And we could talk about that later, but none of it really worked for me.
Yeah.
I actually found recovery the day I left treatment as a result of plugging into a community, a peer support group in my hometown. I was able to access stable housing. I was able to access employment. I was able to find the right types of recovery supports early on in my recovery that were critical to saving my life. Part of that continuum that gets lost in the discussion.
Yeah.
We talk about addiction as a chronic health problem and a chronic health crisis in this country, yet we still deal with it as an acute, crisis issue. We all this money goes towards 28-day, 30-day solutions, but what happens on the 30th day when someone leaves? That's where everybody falls through the cracks. For the 1/10 of people who actually do get to go to addiction treatment in this country, because most people don't.
So you come out of this and you find, in fact, you're a statistic, right? You're part of an incredible crisis that's going on through the whole country. And you took what you called an addiction road trip at one point. Tell me what you saw and how that changed your point of view.
Well, the lead up, the genesis of that trip actually was I lost 4 really close friends of mine to overdoses. Mid 2015, early 2016. I had been sober for about 8 months. 7 to 8 months, and incredibly silent about, I come from a political organizing background, right? So I understand the community organizing model. I understand the power in it, but I was still very silent. Suffering in silence, did not want anybody to know that I had a problem with addiction, and that I even had found recovery. And then roommates of mine, I was still in sober living, roommates of mine started dying. People I went to treatment started dying. People that I was very close to, loved, started dying. And it was right around the time of the 2016 Democratic primaries in California. And I wasn't even registered to vote in the state at the time. I opened up the paper and I saw in the Sacramento Bee that people could run to be delegate to one of the conventions. I organized my community. We had a few hundred people show up to vote, ended up winning, which was just kind of like this phenomenon. And I was a delegate, but after being elected, I said, hey, it's not about the convention. It's about the community, making sure that we're raising the issue, bringing it to the surface. Let's travel the country. Let's drive out to Philadelphia and let's visit as many communities as possible, to see not just the train wreck story, but see the solutions. Let's see what's going on. Visited 22 states over the course of 30 days, 45 foot or 35-foot RV, traveled over 8,000 miles. And it changed my life. It changed my perception on what we could be doing. What I saw in these communities was that the top-down solutions were not working. The money wasn't making it to where it needed to be. It really shattered a lot of biases I had in terms of Republican versus Democrat too. I really saw that this might be the single most unifying issue that we've seen in a generation when it comes to opioid. It might be the one issue that can unify us, that we can get to solutions to. One of the most fascinating things I saw that really led me to start writing at a very high level was Chesterfield County, Virginia, which is a rural, red, Republican, Trump-leaning district, and met with the Republican elected sheriff there. His name's Sheriff Carl Leonard. He's become one of my best friends and mentors, who's running a program out of his jail for inmates so that they can get help before they leave. They can learn what the resources are. They can learn what the triggers are. He's bringing in clinicians. He's having peer support groups. He's allowing people to come back to jail after they're released to mentor the people that are currently in there. And this sheriff couldn't get funding for this program. Now, when we say funding, we're talking probably about $2,500 for 40 inmates a month.
Wow.
Which is nothing compared to what we spend to lock people up and keep them sick. And he was fighting for it. So we started doing some creative things on social media. I started writing about it, started forming these kind of unlikely partnerships to drive for solutions. And we started getting solutions. People started paying attention to us. Things picked up on social media. It wasn't happening in the mainstream media. So we really had to look at like non-traditional means like Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, op-eds, anything to get our voice out there, because we've been silenced. I mean, that's the bottom line. We've been silenced.
So when you talk about top-down solutions, you're talking about government solutions, essentially. You're talking about people in the government looking down and saying, this is what we're going to do, and those don't work.
Correct.
What's missing from them?
Well, I'll cite, the example is there's all this money right now that's been tagged for the opioid crisis, when in fact we have an addiction crisis. Even though I write about the opioid crisis as my book, because that's my story, what we have is an addiction crisis. We need to be supporting people in recovery from all sorts of substances. If we can take care of the opioid crisis, but what's going to happen when we, 2 or 3 years down the line, when we're going into this booming meth crisis or this benzo crisis? The money that's coming right now is being tagged specific for opioid treatment, which is medication-assisted treatment, which I fully support. It is a viable, effective pathway for people who are seeking care for opioid addiction. But that money is not trickling down to states, to counties, to local communities who actually know what to do. So addiction and recovery is not equal in this country. Every state is not equal when it comes to recovery resources. So when the federal government comes in and says, we're going to give you $600 billion, the recovery community, the people who actually know what to do with it, will be lucky to get 1/10 of 1/2 of the percentage of that. And I'm spending a lot of time in Nevada, a lot of time in California, New Hampshire. Rural, urban, whatever. I'm all over the place. And it's the same complaint. The money is going to treat prevention, early intervention, and what they call treatment, which right now is medication, which is fine. We need treatment money. We need naloxone money. We'll take it all. But where the special sauce, where I found recovery and where my friends who are living and thriving in recovery have found recovery is in the continuum of care. It's in our community. It's in my backyard. It's in, it's in Las Vegas, Nevada. It's in places where, they have found a solution, but they can't get funding for it. And the government mandates where this money goes. And local communities get screwed.
Can you be a little bit more specific about when you say it's in the community? Is it the fact of the community that makes the recovery possible, or is it something they are doing at the community level specifically?
Well, it's both. So having a sense of community and a peer community to plug into, no matter where you are, is probably the most important thing to do when you're in recovery from addiction. But each community does something different, right? So one community may be more focused on 12-step. Another community may be more focused on faith-based.
So you talk about the big pharma, basically. You talk about the pharmacological industries, which I do know have a lot of culpability here. Can you be specific about what the problem is at that level?
Well, there's a lot of problems with big pharma. So just last week, I led the largest protest in front of Purdue Pharma, which I think is America's #1 drug cartel, at their offices in Stamford, Connecticut. We had over 500 families show up with their pictures of their kids and their loved ones that they had lost and friends that they had lost, and it impacted me greatly. We're in the midst of these state lawsuits that state attorney generals are taking on against big pharma, opioid manufacturers and distributors. President Trump, just directed Attorney General Sessions on the federal lawsuit. They are culpable. They created this crisis. That is my opinion, and that is actually my personal experience.
Okay.
They lied to doctors. They lied to prescribers. They lied to the American public. They lied to Congress. They lied to the FDA. They presented false research. They presented false studies. Three top Purdue executives in the 2000s were criminally convicted for these crimes. They were fined over $650 million, which is a drop in the bucket to what they should have paid. And they made over $13 billion that's piled on tops of hundreds of thousands of American corpses. Big pharma fueled this crisis from day one. You just need, you can trace it with a timeline. And I can trace it with my personal timeline. This all happened for me in the early 2000s. Oxycontin became kind of their signature drug in the late 90s. I remember going, if I would have known now what I know, if I would have known then what I know now, we'd be in a whole different spot in terms of where I am in my life. I would have probably gotten 10 years of my life back. I was told these drugs were safe. I was told non-addictive. Purdue Pharma there's still some marketing videos you could go on YouTube and find. They said that the addictive risk, I think, was less than 4%.
Yeah, no,
absolutely insane.
I have to ask you, I'm running out of time, but I want to know about the transformation in your political ideas. I'm a conservative. This is a conservative station. When I hear that you were in the Obama administration, and then you went out and saw America, I'd like to know specifically, how did that affect your political view?
I am still a registered Democrat. I'll tell you, I'm fighting right now with the California legislature, which is a Democratic legislature, because of their lack of response to the opioid crisis. I've been working on pieces of legislation there, consumer protections for people who have addiction problems, running up against walls with everything from the governor's office to the Senate to the Assembly in a fully, a fully Democratic legislature. I've worked with the Trump administration. I meet with the Trump administration on various occasions. I'm speaking to them all the time. I meet with Republican legislators, members of Congress. It hasn't necessarily changed my political views. I'm still a very socially liberal person, socially conscious a person when it comes to my politics. It has changed my perception, though, on being a little bit more independent. I have gone from being a liberal Democrat to being a single issue voter. And my single issue is the opioid crisis. I've seen great legislation and great progress, more progressive progress coming out from the Republican Party on some of these issues. And I've seen some great stuff coming from Democrats, too. At the end of this, though, I'll tell you, coming with the 2018 midterm elections coming up, there's an opportunity for one of these parties to really capitalize on it. I think the case can be made that President Trump won in part because he spoke to voters who were impacted by the opioid crisis better than Hillary did. He absolutely did it. Clear. He won those states. He won those counties. They put him over the top. There's 23 million people living in long-term recovery in the United States. There's another 21 million people who are currently suffering. That's 45 million Americans. 1 in 3 households is impacted somehow, directly impacted. We are a large constituency when we're organized, a very, very large constituency. And we happen to be a single voting constituency when the issues are presented to us and we're organized in the right way. So, I mean, we're doing some phenomenal work around that. There's the first ever recovery pact that's coming out of Nevada. It's organized by Republicans and Democrats, and Republican funders and Democrat funders. It has really made me more independent. I am definitely a much more independent thinker when it comes to this. I have sat across the desk of some senior Democratic officials, senior Democratic members of Congress, and I feel like banging my head up against the table. And I have done the same thing at the White House.
Sure.
It's all equal when it comes to this issue, 100%.
Ryan Hampton, I'd like to talk to you some more, but people are just going to have to read your book, American Fix, Inside the Opioid Addiction Crisis and How to End It. I really appreciate your coming on. Thanks a lot.
Thank you, Andrew. Appreciate it.